Hi guys, I hope everyone is doing well. Can you believe we are finally in June? Doesn't seem real, but there's a few more days left of actual teaching and actual classes. So that's pretty weird and exciting, but um, we're almost near the end. So I went through this with my period two today, and I figured it's actually pretty good to go through it and send it to you guys as well. All right, so when you're given a graph and you need to find the equation, you always start from the y-axis. The reason we use this as a boundary, because we only covered period changes up and down, meaning your midline changes, um, stretch or shrink, meaning your amplitude, reflection, but we did not do horizontal translation, meaning left or right. So um, those are transformations. However, we do not do them in Algebra 2. So we start from the y-axis. Then from the y-axis, you see, are you starting at the max, min, or midline? Here you are starting at the max, okay? So then if you're starting at the max, this must be a cosine function because sine starts at the midline always. So you look to see when you're back at the maximum. And in that case, you are back at the maximum pi over 2, which will be your period, okay? So this graph goes from maximum of 2 down to the minimum of -2, back to the maximum of 2 at pi over 2 units. Then you also look at the midline. Well, the midline is the center of the graph. There should be the same distance above the midline and below. So the midline here is 0. So now we're ready. We have all the tools we need to create our equation. So we know it is cosine. So we have y equals, we know it's cosine. Now the amplitude is the distance from the midline. Here it's the same, so it's 2. We have to figure out what the b value is in a minute, but that's going to be with x. And then the midline is 0. So you can put plus 0, but you don't need to. So to find the b value, we know the period is pi over 2. And we know the formula for a period is 2 pi over b. So here you cross multiply and get pi times b equals 4 pi, divide by pi, and b equals 4. So the equation for this graph is y equals 2 cosine 4x. So that's how you find your equation step by step, okay? So the next few questions are what a lot of you have been having questions on or kind of concerns about what to do. And you will have 2 word problems on your test tomorrow. So as you ride the Ferris wheel, your distance from the ground varies with time. You are the last seat filled on the Ferris wheel. So we picture that we are going to load on the Ferris wheel here, okay? And they're saying that TB the number of seconds, this should actually say minutes, that have elapsed since the Ferris wheel started. The top of the Ferris wheel, so key information, is 43 feet above the ground, and that the wheel makes 1 revolution every 8 minutes, okay? The diameter of the wheel is 40 feet, okay? So we have a lot of key information here, okay? So we know the top of the Ferris wheel, or the highest point, is 43 feet. Okay, we know the diameter is 40, so that means from the top of the circle to the bottom is 40 of the circle. So if I take 43 minus 40, I get a minimum height of 3 feet. okay? So that takes care of, so far, your y-axis. You know there's one piece missing is our midline, which we'll get to. Then you look at your period, which is 8 minutes. Okay, so you have 8 minutes, divide by 2, you get 4. Divide 4 by 2, you get 2. 2 times 3 gives you 6. So this is time, and you want to label, it's a little difficult here, time in minutes. Okay. So one last piece we need to figure out is the midline. Well, if the diameter is 40, the midline is going to be the radius. Well, 40 divided by 2 is 20, but we're also 3 feet above the ground. So your midline would be 23, and your amplitude is 20. So here's your midline. Okay, now they're telling us that you get on the Ferris wheel at this point. So it's not at the ground, it's not at the maximum, not at the midline. If there was a platform at 23 feet where you get on the Ferris wheel, then that's where you would start. But here they're saying you're the last seat filled, which you won't get on at the top, only at the bottom. So 3 feet, and then you follow the pattern. Okay, and this is the cosine graph. However, the cosine graph that is reflected. Okay, so your equation would be y equals negative, because it's reflected, 20, which is your amplitude, cosine, and we'll see x in a minute, or b in a minute, and we know it's plus 23. Okay, because 23 is the midline. So again, how do we figure out our b value? Well, it takes 8 minutes equals 2 pi over b. So you have 8b, once you cross multiply, equals 2 pi, divide by 8, and your b equals pi over 4. So that's, we'll go into this spot right here, pi over 4. So that's your equation. So now to answer B, what is the height after 6 minutes? Well, if you look at your diagram that you created, your graph, you could see that at 6 minutes, we're at 23 feet. Okay, so I will show you in a few minutes how to do that in the calculator as well. Or you could plug in 6 for X because that is your time. You can replace it with T as well. So this next question, how long does it take the Ferris wheel to get to 18 feet off the ground? Now, 18 feet falls in this ballpark somewhere. So we want to see when it reaches 18 feet. Well, it's twice, on the way up and on the way down. So we need our calculator for that. So you're going to enter this first equation. Okay, and I'm just going to include, because it didn't do that, pi over 4. This is y1. And y2 would be 18. Okay, so I'm going to show you my calculator screen. Go to y equals, enter your equation, negative 20 cosine pi over 4 x plus 23. Oops. Then y2, you enter 18. Okay, before you graph anything, you have to adjust your window. Well, your window is what you graphed already. So your X values is how many minutes? So 0, 8. Your Y values is your height. Your minimum height was 3. Your maximum height is 43. And then hit graph. Okay, here's the graph. So now we have to find these two intersection points. So we go from second trace, number 5. The cursor's at the top, so you want to move it all the way close to that first intersection. Enter 3 times, and you get 1.7 minutes. Okay, 1.7 minutes, just jot that down. Then we have to do the other side. Bring the cursor to the other side, hit enter 3 times, and you end up getting 6.3 minutes. Okay, so when it hits 18 feet, you're at 1.7 minutes or 1 minute and 42 seconds. And for 6.3, you're at 6 minutes and 18 seconds. But for this type of problem, I will accept 1.7 minutes and 6.3 minutes. Okay, so if I wanted to see when the graph, or what is the height after 6 minutes, I could do second trace value, number 1, and x equals 6. And that's where I get the 23. You could do any value to see what the height would be as well. Okay. However, it's only going to show you whole numbers. You could try, let's say, 6.5. It should show you that. Okay. Should show you that. But again, you could find that as well as plugging it in for x. So that answers how long. How long you're always finding the time. Okay. Now, here's a tied question. Now, a bunch of these, you're going to see a lot of the information given to you in the first paragraph. Okay. However, if you're not sure if it's going to be at high tide, low tide, max, min, where is it starting, midline, read through the questions given to you. But in this specific scenario, all the information you need is in the paragraph here. So you have the highest mark of the tide is 22 feet. So that's your maximum. And that's happening at 4 a.m. where t equals 0. We'll fill in the time in a second, but we're just going to do t equals 0. And the lowest is at 2 feet. Okay, so this is height in feet. And the full cycle takes about 12 hours. So that's your period of 12 hours. Oops. Okay, so to find the increments, 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, so if t equals 0 is at 4 a.m., so this is 4 a.m., this is 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 4 p.m., okay, to fill in the times. So one last piece we're missing is the midline. Well, if we take 22 minus 2 is 20, divide by 2 is 10. However, we have to add 10 to 2 or subtract 10 from 22, which is 12. Okay, so with this, you have your midline. But here, they're telling you at t equals 0, you're at the highest mark, okay, which is 22. And at 10 a.m., you're at your midline, or at your minimum, excuse me. So in between, you're at your midline. 9 is at your midline. And we know after 12 hours is one full period, you're ending back at the maximum. So here's your graph, and it will be connected a little bit better on yours. So when we write this equation, we have y equals 10, which is our amplitude, cosine x plus 12. And we're going to be doing the same thing with finding the b value. So your period's 12, so 12 equals 2 pi over b. So you have 12 times b equals 2 pi, divide by 12, divide by 12, and you get a b value of pi over 6, which is right here. Now, some cases here we have a positive a value, but if they didn't give you any information, typically some people will assume that you're starting at the minimum, okay, of low tide and then increasing the high tide. But again, be very specific, and you guys will see very specific examples due to the fact that I'll be grading off of one equation, not many, okay? So what is the height of the tide at 7 a.m.? You could look at your graph, but you could also see T is 3, right? Because that's 7 a.m., 3 hours after 4 a.m. But we could tell from the graph that it's 12 feet. Okay. And then for C, when is the tide at 10 feet? Well, we'll be doing the same thing as we did. Y1 is our first equation. Y2 equals 10. So we'll go to y equals, clear this out, enter our equation, cosine pi over 6 x plus 12, and then this is 10. And then we go to our window 0 to 12 because it's a 12-hour window. Minimum height is 2 feet. Maximum is 22. Hit graph. Okay, and we do the same thing. Second trace, number 5. Move your cursor close, hit enter 3 times. So just jot this down, 3.4 hours, and we're going to convert it to the actual time shortly. So 3.4. Then we have to do the other side. Hit enter 3 times, and you see that it's 8.6. So if I go back to this screen, and we have 3.4 hours. Well, 3 hours after 4 a.m. is 7. So it will be 7 a.m. and 0.4 minutes is 24. Because you take 0.4 times 6. So that's 7:24 a.m. And then 8.6 hours. 8 hours after 4 a.m. is 12 noon. 0.6 minutes is 36. So that's 12:36 p.m. And that's how you would answer those two. Okay, so those are 2 word problems you will see, as well as if you look at this next one, write a periodic function that has a period of 12 pi and a midline given by the equation y equals 3 and amplitude of 4, then graph it. So here you have your option. You could either, since it just says periodic, either sine or cosine. All right, guys, so leaving off at this question, write a periodic function that has a period of 12 pi and a midline given by the equation y equals 3 and an amplitude of 4. So they're giving you the option to either do sine or cosine. I am going to show you both, but this is also showing you that if it's sine or cosine, your amplitude, midline, and period value are all going to be the same. So we are going to start with, let's say, cosine. So you have y equals amplitude of 4 cosine. Okay, we're going to find that b value in 1 second. And the y value is plus 3 because that's your midline. So to find your b value, we have 12 pi equals 2 pi over b. So when you cross multiply, you have 12 pi times b equals 2 pi divided by 12 pi. 12 pi, oops, and you end up with the b value. Pi's cancel, 2 divided by 12 gives you 1/6. So that ends up being 1/6 times x, okay? So if I was to graph, okay, so if I was to graph cosine, start with 12 pi here. Half of 12 pi is 6 pi. Half of 6 is 3 pi. 3 times 3 gives me the 9 pi. Okay, my midline is 3. Okay, so that's all the way across. My maximum, you take 3 plus 4, and that gives you 7. And then 3 minus 4 gives you -1. Sorry about the little person in the back. So now cosine starts at the maximum. So you have 7, then the midline, minimum, midline, back to the maximum. So if you decided to do a cosine graph, that would be the equation. If you did the sine graph, you're just replacing cosine with sine. And when you graph this function, you're starting at the midline, up to the maximum, back to the midline, minimum, back to the midline, and then connect. Okay, oops. So they gave you the option of saying periodic function to do sine or cosine. Okay, and the last thing is graph the function. Okay, so the amplitude is 3. Okay, there is a reflection. Midline is y equals 0. And the period equals pi because it's 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi. Now you have pi units. That's 1 full rotation. Half of pi is pi over 2. Okay, so pi over 2 divided by 2 gives you pi over 4. Pi over 4 times 3, 3 pi over 4. So I know my amplitude is 3. So that means the midline, we know that the midline is 0. Okay, denote by a dashed line, so 3 above and 3 below. However, this is a reflection, so instead of starting the cosine graph at the max, we're starting it at the min. And then the midline, max, midline, min. And then you're able to connect to a smooth curve. Okay, so I hope this helps going through a few of the problems. Your test is either tomorrow for period 3 and 4 and Wednesday for period 2. You will be given a PDF as well that goes along with the test that you will be uploading all together for the last question. You will not be filling out a unit circle, but if you want to do so ahead of time, you may do so and have that with you. But the test will start during your class period, and typically, I know it takes a little bit longer to complete online tests, so it might I might extend it a little bit for you, but it has to be completed tomorrow, and this is your last big summative. Also, if you have not filled out the pass-fail option or pass or traditional grade option, please do that as well. And that should do it. All right, good luck.